Next we'll look at measure numbers. By default, when we create a new score, measure numbers are added to the beginning of each line except the number 1 on the first line. Measure numbers may be set in increments of 10 for easy reading. We go back to the piece we started from the last section of the tutorial. This is an orchestral score with different instruments stacked on top of each other. By default, measure numbers are added to the instrument on top at the beginning of each line except the number 1. We do a double click on a measure number and find that we can't edit it. The measure number is the thing that people tend to leave at the default setting. Usually when we change the style of the measure number, we would change them all as a group. Open the text style menu. We can do all the things with the measure numbers like any other piece of text, including the things we don't normally do, such as changing it to a fancy font, putting in an underline or a frame around the number. Click on Apply to see how the changes would look. We remove the frame, the underline, and change to italics. Change the font back to the original and leave the font size as is, which is something you might do. Now go to Style, General, and click on Header, Footer, Numbers to open the menu. At the bottom we see the heading Measure Numbers. We are going to see the different ways it can be displayed. Measure Numbers has a box with a check mark beside it. Click on the box and then Apply to turn the measure numbers off. By default, measure numbers is on when you create a new score. Turn the measure numbers back on. The next two are the Show First and the All Staves. Click on both boxes and apply. We see a 1 in the first measure and the same number above each staff for the different instrument parts. Normally the measure numbers appear above the top staff in a piano or an orchestral score and the number 1 is not displayed. We have the option of changing both. Uncheck both boxes and click on Apply. At the bottom we see every system and interval. By default, a measure number is displayed in the beginning of each line. Here we see the number 5 beside interval. Click on interval, then apply. Move the menu over and we see that the measure numbers is set to an interval of 5. We can set the interval to any number we want, but setting it to 5 or 10 is much easier to read. Click on Cancel to keep the default settings. Next, scroll across a few pages and stop at the Adagio. This is the second movement of the piece and the measure number should be reset to 1. On the last measure of the first movement there is a page break above it. We click on the white space in the measure to select it. Click on Breaks and Spacers under the palette. Double-click on the third button and add a section break next to the page break. The measure number in the first measure of the Adagio has reset to 1. Normally the number 1 is not shown. We also see the list of instruments appears on the left side of measure 1. Save the changes and close the piece. Next we open two pieces and adjust each of the measure numbers. In both of these pieces you find that the first measure has an upbeat. The piece we are on, the first measure has only one beat while the time signature is in 3/4. When we have an incomplete first measure of a section, don't count the measure. Move the pointer over the first measure. Do a right click and open the Measure Properties menu. At the bottom under the heading Other, we see the option Exclude from Measure Count. Click on Apply and we see that the measure number below has changed to 6 from 7. The other way we can achieve the same result is to put a -1 in the bottom box next to the label Add to Measure Number. If we do it this way, we can uncheck the box that says Exclude from Count. And the box next to Measure Number Mode, we change it to Always Hide. Close the menu and we see the measure number below has changed to 6 as before. Close this piece. In this piece we see an upbeat in the first measure of a waltz in 3/4 time. However, the measure is notated with the rest in front of a note adding up to 3 beats. Unlike the previous example, the first measure is a complete measure, so we would leave it as is and not exclude it from the measure count. In the middle of the piece we see a first and second ending. By convention, we only count the measures in the final ending. We move the pointer over the first measure in the second ending, do a right click and open the Measure Properties menu. Put in a -1 in the Add to Measure Count box since we have one measure in the first ending. We change the measure number mode from automatic to always show. This is optional. When set to automatic, a measure number would only appear at the beginning of each line except for the number 1, which is not displayed at the default setting. There are measures in the beginning of a section you want the measure number to show to make the piece easier to read even if the measure is not at the beginning of a line. Click on OK and move the measure number a bit higher. Close this piece. In this section we will look at adding fingerings. There are sheet music with some finger numbers that has been added later or none at all. Original compositions don't have fingerings written in. A piece with a finger number beside every note is usually for a beginner. The fingerings that is entered into Muse score is for reference when a piece is printed on paper or compiled into a file that can be read on a tablet. Additional fingerings may be added in pencil by a musician on a paper copy. By default, fingering for a note by itself is placed on top of the note and fingering for a note in a stack is on the left. A score with 2 staffs for a piano, you will see a number for single notes placed on top for the top staff and at the bottom of a note for the bottom staff. Next we open a piece and enter some fingerings. This piece already has some numbers on the top staff. We will enter some fingerings for notes on the bottom staff. There are 2 ways to enter a fingering into Muse score. We select a note. Go to Add on top and under Text you will find fingering. Here all you see is a text input box. We can enter a number or a piece of text. Another way is to use the fingering menu under the palette. You will see numbers from 0 to 5, guitar and lute fingerings etc. for different instruments. We can drag a finger number onto a note and release. The easier way is to select the note and double-click on a number. We can move the number around a little bit to look nicer. The numbers can be bigger so that it is easier to read. We do a right-click over a fingering to open the text style menu and increase the font size. The numbers on the top staff is part of the original. We will define a different style for the numbers we just added to make them stand out. We go to Style, Text and we find the New button at the bottom. And we enter a name for the style. Here we are going to use a style that looks like handwriting. After defining the style, we click on OK. For the new numbers we added, we will select each individually, go to Text Style under the Inspector panel and change it. The default text style is fingering. We will find the new style we added by scrolling to the bottom of the list. Do the same for the other numbers. Save the piece and close. The next piece we are going to insert a finger number into a note head. Fixing fingerings is common in music for beginner students, so you may choose to skip the section. We zoom in to see the notes better. First we insert a finger number on top of a note. We open the text properties menu and make the font size a bit smaller so we can fit the number into the note head. We move the number to the middle of the note head. While the number is highlighted in blue, we change the color under the inspector panel to white. Note that once a number is fixed in place, it can no longer be changed. Save the piece and close. In this section we are going to add lyrics to a song. The way we enter lyrics into a score is to break them into syllables and line them up under each note. If there are more than one line of notes, the lyrics will be aligned to the top line which contains the melody. You can type in the syllables manually under each note. As you are typing, there are 5 different keys you need to know. The first is the space bar or the right arrow to skip to the next word. The hyphen is used to skip to the next syllable of the same word with a hyphen added in between. The underscore is to add underscore lines at the end of a word. This is to indicate that the syllable you're on will continue for one or more notes. And the enter key is used to go down to the syllable directly below the one you're on. You can press enter to insert a new verse if you are already on the last verse. If you need to move back a syllable as you're typing, you use the left arrow key. It is much faster if you save the lyrics to a text file, do all the editing beforehand and then paste the different verses into the piece. We open a piece and enter the lyrics. Here we have a piano score. By default, the bar lines extend from the top to the bottom staff. One thing we can do to make the lyrics easier to read is to change the display of the bar lines. We select a bar line. Do a right click, then select all similar elements to select all the bar lines. Under the inspector panel we find the span staves setting is at 2. We change it to 1. Now we're going to enter the first 2 verses of the lyrics. There are a lot of song lyrics that are already posted online so we don't have to do any typing. Here the song lyrics is saved to a text file. All we need to do is copy and paste a few times. Open the text file with the lyrics and we see 4 verses. Zoom in to see it better. Scroll to the bottom. We have the duplicate of the verses except the text is already divided into syllables. Look carefully and you see a hyphen between 2 syllables of the same word. There are places you'd put in 2 hyphens next to each other. This is for a syllable that continues to the next note but is not at the end of a word. The last syllable of a word that continues to the next note we'd put in 2 underscore characters next to each other. The first is to skip to the next note and the second is a note filler. You may wish to sing through the verses in your head to make sure you divided the text in the right places. Copy verse 1. Go back to the piece. Select the first note of the top line which is the melody line. Go to Add, Text and Lyrics. We notice that the shortcut key is Ctrl-L. Hold the Ctrl key and then V to paste the text. You need to lift your fingers every few seconds for the computer processor to catch up. Verse 1 looks okay. Go to the text file and copy the next verse. Go back to the top of the piece. Click on the first syllable in verse 1. Use the shortcut Ctrl-L to activate lyrics input. Use Ctrl-V to paste the next verse in. Near the end of the verse there is a syllable that continues to the next note but is not at the end of the word. We needed 2 hyphens in the text file. We click on the white space to turn off text input. Then press undo a few times to get to the word that was wrong. Go to the text file, make the correction and do a copy from that word to the end. Go back to where we left off. Select the top note or the syllable directly above, do a Ctrl-L and then Ctrl-V to paste the text. When we're done, Save the piece for backup. The default font style used in Muse Score looks okay in most cases. There are times you want to change the font or the font size to look better on a page. We go to Style, Text, and we see two options: Lyrics Odd Lines and Lyrics Even Lines. The reason Muse Score is set up this way is that you can use a different font for the odd and even lines to make the text more readable instead of having all the text looking the same. Muse Score does allow you to select each syllable in the lyrics and change the font style individually. It is rare to use more than two font styles on a piece of sheet music. It is more common to have just one font style with certain words in bold or italics for emphasis. We will change the font for the even lines and see how it looks. When we click on individual syllables and look under text in the inspector panel, we can see that the style is set to either lyrics odd lines or lyrics even lines. We can keep the lyrics with two text styles if we like. We can also fix the lyrics to just one style instead of having a separate style for the odd and even lines. If we use only one text style, the next time we change the font for the lyrics, all the text would change instead of every other line. We move the pointer over a syllable. Do a right click and choose Select All Similar Elements. You will see all the lyrics highlighted. We go to the text style under the inspector panel and we can flip between lyrics odd and even lines to see which version looks better and use it for the piece. We'll keep the lyrics even lines version. Suppose we want a piece of text to be in bold or italics. We move the pointer over an individual syllable and do a right click, then open the text properties menu. Unlike making changes in the text style menu, the changes here will only apply to the syllable we selected. Suppose we want to add a number in front of each verse. There are different ways that would work. Here is one way to do it. Click on the white space outside the score and drag the piece back to the top. Look closely at the text and we see that the syllables are aligned under the notes and centered. Double-click on the first syllable to get into edit mode. We type in a 1. In between we add filler spaces. The space bar for skipping to the next syllable won't work. We open the Special Characters menu. The first tab is Common Symbols, where we find the character for a space. We add 15 filler spaces for now. Click on the white space outside to turn off edit mode. We double-click on the syllable below and enter a 2 the same way. Open the Special Characters menu and add filler spaces. When we are done, we see that the first syllable in each line is too far to the right. We click on the syllable that has fewer letters and move it to the left, and at the same time try to center it with the notes above, leaving the number further to the left. We move the first syllable in the other line and at the same time the numbers should line up nicely. We remove some excess filler spaces from the syllable that has more letters so that the first syllable in each line looks centered underneath the notes above. Looks okay, so we leave it as is. Save the piece and close. There are pieces you see one verse under the staff and the other verses at the end of the piece. We open another version of the piece with one verse already added. First we scroll down to the bottom. For convenience, we select the first note on the bass clef used as the anchor point to align the lyrics. Open text under the palette and double-click on staff text. We see that a piece of text has been added for reference. We move it to roughly where we want the text to go. Do the same for the other two verses. The next step is to add in the lyrics. Go back to the text file. We are going to use the original version without the breaks between the syllables. Copy the text in verse 2. In the score we double-click and highlight staff text and do a paste. Do the same for the other verses. The default text style is staff under the inspector panel. What we do is hold the Control or the Command key on a Mac and select the other verses. Change the style to lyrics odd lines to match the first verse. The original justification is set to center so that each syllable would look nice under a note. Here the text looks better left justified. Open the Text Properties menu and change the horizontal alignment. We notice that the Text Properties menu only allow you to change one block of text at a time, so we need to change the other two to left justify separately. When we're done, realign the blocks of text. These can be aligned exactly with each other. Click on verse 2 and copy the number for the horizontal offset under the inspector panel. Click on the verse below and paste the number for the offset. Click on verse 2 again and copy the number for the vertical offset. Click on the verse across and paste the number for the offset. Save the piece and we're done. Bye for now and thank you for watching.